Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural Equity Insights Fireside Chat. This is the first in a series that we're going to have, and we have a treat for you. Not only have our president of the City County Council and a great architect, well-renowned, Bob Osley, that's going to say a couple of words. We also have our own Holli Harrington, that's going to talk to Phillip Washington, who is an icon in the industry. He's going to basically tell us his story. And I hope his story inspires and educates everybody and gives everybody the ability to put yourself in his shoes. He came from very modest beginnings, and he's the CEO of transit in one of the largest metroplexes in the United States. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to President Osley to say a couple of words. And thank you very much for being here. We really, really appreciate it.
I am thrilled. Thank you, Mario. I'm honored to be part of this inaugural Equity Insights Fireside Chat with yourself and the amazing Holli Harrington. You guys are stars in my eyes. You all continue to set incredibly high bars for others to follow. And I put together a few notes, and I won't go through them, but let me sort of summarize it like this. What I think is the most exciting about these efforts is they're being undertaken by an airport. And when I think about words such as racial equity, the first thing that comes to mind, I would be curious on part of all of our listeners. I would be curious what they thought. It's perhaps images of unemployment lines or destitute communities, or perhaps scenes of peaceful marches or jarring riots. Whatever popped into anyone's mind when I said racial equity, except for you two, of course, I can almost guarantee that it wasn't an airport. And the lesson that each of us draws from what IAA is doing, you and your staff, is that there's no field of work, there is no discipline or art, no corporate or community enterprise to which the discussion of racial equity is not relevant. There is just not. So, it may take some time for individual agencies or organizations to find the specific levers that they're best suited to push. But I'll tell you, if a municipal airport authority can find a way to not just be a participant, but a leader in the field of equity, then any organization can. So, summing up is this. We cannot break the hold that racism has had on our society unless we break its hold on our most personal and most sort of intimate selves. And the more often that we engage in dialogue like you're about to do, the more we normalize this conversation. People often say, don't talk about it, be about it. But in truth, how can you be about it if you don't talk about it? So I just want to say thank you for what you are doing and the leadership that you all are showing. So if folks thought they were here for a simple fireside chat, they're here to change the world, as you all are. And that begins with a chat, and to which I'm inviting everyone to enjoy and participate in. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. Phillip Washington has such an immense resume and such a bright resume that it's online. I encourage all of you to look at it. And Holli and I have been concentrating on doing one thing. While for us, changing the world becomes a moral imperative, and sometimes it's really, really difficult to change the world, we could change this place. And that's what we're concentrating on, one step at a time. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Phillip Washington. And Phillip, sir, Phil, whatever you like. If you want to go straight into questions and answer, into a fireside chat with Holli Harrington, or if you want to say a couple of words, the floor is yours, and we are incredibly honored to have you here.
Mario, it's great to see you again. For those that don't know, Mario and I worked together very, very closely, and Mario was one of the cornerstones of the Biden-Harris transition team as we worked to prepare the current U.S. DOT leadership that is in place now to include Secretary Buttigieg's Transportation Secretary Buttigieg. So great to see you, Mario, and great to take part in this conversation. I listened in to the previous speaker just now, and he is so right in saying that this is about doing something, and this is about having a conversation on these issues. So I'm just so happy to be here with you, Mario, and Ms. Harrington as well.
I'll turn it over to you. See, I get to do the easy part. I just get to introduce everybody and say hi to everybody, and Holly and you get to do the heavy lifting.
Thanks, Mario.
Yeah, and I'm just Phil. I'm just Phil, by the way.
Okay, I was about to start off Mr. Washington. All right, Phil. First, we just want to again thank you for agreeing to participate in our Equity Insights Fireside Chat, and just want to remind everybody that the intent behind these discussions is President Osley was spot on in sharing that we want to normalize the conversation about race and equity. We've got to learn to lean in. Sometimes they're very easy conversations, and sometimes they're really tough. But we understand that each of us is unique based on our own individual experiences. And the purpose of these discussions is to have other people share their experiences, and others can gain a better understanding. It may not change your perspective, but at least it will help you better understand why others have a different opinion than yours. And then we can lean in together and figure out how we can work together. And I use the term for the greater good. So if we're working in transportation, how do we all improve transportation for everybody? And I think that's a common goal that all of us share. So to start, Phil, will you share a little bit about your backstory? I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan. So when I saw south side of Chicago, I smiled, remembering the days of my youth when we would go up on Michigan Avenue and explore Chicago. But the south side was a little bit different. So I would just love for you to share, your perspective of growing up, and how has that shaped you as a leader today?
Thank you, Holly. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I grew up in public housing, not far from Indianapolis, by the way, right up 65, Interstate 65. So I know the area very, very well. Grew up in a place called Argyle Gardens, and the significance of that area was, first of all, it's the oldest public housing in the country, and people don't realize that area. It was actually built on a waste dump, a landfill. It's right just, I guess, west of 94 as you're driving into the city on like 130th. You may know the area. And there were 50 landfills. You can see some of the landfills on the west side of, or the east side of the highway on 94 as you're going up. And that area was called the Toxic Donut, right? I can remember growing up and having some sort of leaks or something, and they had to evacuate the whole public housing complex. It was crazy. So growing up in that area, in an area that, that was a community, really, even in that public housing, and being the only son of a single mother with 5 sisters, and all but 4 of my sisters are older than me. Now, what that means, though, is that, and as the only son, that meant really dealing with a lot of older guys who were, my sister's boyfriends. My mother would tell me to go out there and defend your sisters, you know what I mean? So dealing with older guys and getting whooped by older guys, was not fun in defending my sisters. But I think that really shaped me in growing up and in the sort of the leadership positions that I was to have both in the military and in the transportation industry as well. And believe it or not, I still talk to friends that I went to high school with right now. We're still very, very close. And just heard from one of them a couple of weeks ago. Of course, he was asking me for some money or something. So, didn't necessarily want to hear from him on that. But it was an interesting and different childhood growing up.
Awesome. And I'll share with you, I am one of 5 girls.
Oh.
And so with this month being Women's Month, Women's History Month, I salute your sisters, and I'm sure you are a diligent and faithful brother.
Yeah, I had to be.
Here at the airport, we have something called our core values, which are respect, integrity, trust, and excellence. We're curious to know, what are your core values and how have they influenced your success?
Well, I think, integrity is one. When I think about values, I immediately think about integrity, treating people the right way with respect, respecting all views by all people. And I think we have to do that as leaders, regardless of what industry we are in. Credibility, I think, is important as well. Honesty, I think, is important when you talk about core values, and also working hard. I think the idea of working hard, again, integrity, credibility, respect, all of those things. I will say this too, is, I'm a civil rights baby. I grew up in the civil rights movement, where, my mother took me to the marches. I was talking to someone the other day. I can still remember in 1967 going to the march in a place called Marquette Park in Chicago, where Martin Luther King was. And that was where he got hit in the head with the rock, and at Marquette Park. That was right there in Chicago. And we went to all these marches. And so that really laid a really solid foundation in my life. That and growing up in the era of Emmett Till, and in 1955 when he went down south, we grew up with that story, and it led to some things that maybe we'll talk about during my military career, going down south for the first time from the north, from Chicago. And thinking about that Emmett Till story, and my mother being very, very worried and concerned about me going down south or to the south, understanding those stories coming up. So I think those things, those core values have stuck with me, all of the ones that I've mentioned.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm going to throw you a curveball here because it's it's my nature. But, I like what you said. We're a summation of our experiences. And although we may think that some of our experiences aren't as good as other people, I grew up poor. I consider myself lucky to have grown up poor because I have a different view on life than most people. And give me your experiences in the military going down south. That had to be something fascinating.
Yeah.
Because just military during that time down south, and I could say I grew up in the South, but I really didn't. I grew up in South Florida, which is outside of the South. So I don't have a point of reference, and I lived in New Orleans, but that isn't even the South either. So
yeah. Well, our backgrounds are probably similar, Mario. I guess one of the good things of growing up, in public housing, in the community I grew up in, we all had about the same thing, which was pretty much nothing. you know.
Yeah.
So I have to say that, you know, we knew we were poor. We knew we were, you know, we could have done better. But I've got to say that, and I really point to my mother and my grandmother. My grandmother raised me. I really point to them for making it, you know, so that it was not horrible. You know what I mean? It was, you know, we played ball, we played sports, we were organized in the community. But those experiences, I would not trade them in for anything in the world. I really would not. You know, the things that I learned growing up like that, I just would not change those things. And they've stuck with me the entire time, my entire life up to this point. And I hearken back to those things with regard to decision making that I make right now on big decisions. And perhaps we can talk about that as well.
Holli, back to you.
Awesome.
You know what's interesting, before she asked her question, I didn't know we were poor until I grew up.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, darn, we're poor.
Yeah, that's right. Same here.
I wanted to get to a question about what would you say was your biggest challenge in getting to where you are now?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for me is reinforcing, and this will sound odd, right? But reinforcing within my own psyche that I belong. Now, I mean, this is a tough thing because I think when you grow up like we have, you know, there is a conditioning that goes on that we may not even be aware of because of our socioeconomic position, because of the color of our skin, because of many things. There might be underlying conditioning that society places on you. And so I found myself both in the military, and I find you know, myself even sometimes now. Actually, my mother used to always say, "Son, pray for confidence, self-confidence." And I didn't understand that then, but I think oftentimes we are conditioned in such a way to feel inferior. And we have to guard against that, you know. And when I say we, I mean like me and Mario and others. We have to tell ourselves, you know, that we belong, that we have the education, that we have the know-how, that we can articulate, that we can do all of these things and shut off some of these, you know, some of these negative thoughts that might surface because of our conditioning. You know, it's no secret that our skin color speaks before we do when we walk into a room. And, you know, these predisposed perceptions that might exist, we have to make sure that doesn't rub off on us. And so when you asked about my greatest challenge, and, you know, I don't want to come off as saying that I'm not self-confident and things like that. But I think, listen, it takes a while to get over sometimes the conditioning that you may have, that may have been ingrained in you. And this is not something that my mother conditioned us with. My mother was always saying, you can do anything you want to do. You can, you know, and all of that. But once you leave the house and leave the public housing in an apartment, and then you deal with people, sometimes that perception prevails.
Awesome. I really appreciate that when you talk about reinforcing that I belong. One of the conversations, you know, as I mentor young people is they have the "Am I good enough" attitude. And a lot of times they're waiting for someone to tell them, what advice do you have? And this is kind of a building on what you just talked about for somebody that has been conditioned. I can share with you, I'm an engineer out of Detroit, and people were telling me I should be a nurse or a teacher. And I'm very grateful to have the mother that I had, that when I was taking the stove apart, she was like, "You're not a nurse or a teacher." I didn't like the noise it was making. It was disrupting my nap, so I tried to fix it. So
now the question is, did you?
yes, I did.
Oh, very good. So you're an engineer.
So I am a mechanical engineer, but
okay.
all my life, you know, people were pushing me in another way. So I just was curious, from your perspective, what advice would you give to young people who are being conditioned in a different direction than their passion? How did you overcome that sense of, do I belong? Am I good enough?
Well, I think, and I think Mario can opine on this as well. You know, I kept telling myself, and with the help, you know, and the raising of my dear mother, to look beyond your current circumstance. Look beyond your current circumstance. So that is what I tell young people now. I tell my son that right now. Look beyond your current circumstance. I mean, growing up with five sisters, for one, they had it hard as well because they were being conditioned to not just, be, just, homebodies or whatever. They were being conditioned to not think executive positions or anything. So I always thought it was tougher on my sisters than it was on me, to be honest with you, because you got that dual challenge of being a woman and especially a woman of color, right? Black, brown, whatever, right? And so what I tell young people right now is to look beyond your circumstance, your current circumstance. Education is the way out. I used to talk to people about, education is so important. And the first people that really understood the value of education, the value was actually slave owners. I mean, slave owners understood. That's why slaves were beat if they were caught reading, or learning anything, because they understood the value. Because when a person begins to think beyond their current circumstance, that is a powerful thing. When they began to think, well, you know what, guess what? I can go overseas. Or guess what? I can do this or that. I can get a college degree. When they begin to think beyond their current circumstance, they become a threat to the establishment. And so when I talk to young people, I say to them, you must think beyond what you are now. And I think once we begin to do that, we began to expand our horizons. We began to pick up a book and travel to Spain or Italy through that book. It's a fantastic thing. And I think that is how we should face life as well.
I couldn't agree with it more. That was, Phil, that was perfectly put. Conditioning is such an incredibly difficult thing to break. It's like hitting it with a rock, hitting a rock with a big hammer. You've got to keep doing it every single day and beat that rock down in order to break that conditioning. And, heck, I still have to every day look at myself in the mirror because, and I guess you call it an imposter sort of syndrome, that you look at yourself in the mirror and you go, I can't believe I'm doing this, but as long as they believe I know what I'm doing, I'll keep doing it. So it kind of is, it's difficult. And every one of us, including me, have to keep hitting that rock every day because we've been conditioned so strongly to do certain things that I find myself doing silly things and just like going, well, why am I doing this? Because I was conditioned over and over and over to do it. So
That's right.
Yeah. No, thank you. If
perfect.
if our mic wasn't virtual, you could drop it.
Yeah, you get it out. Perfect. Perfect.
So no, so I hope not just the young people are heard that, but looking beyond your current circumstance.
Mhm.
I know I'm above 50 now, and there's things that I still want to do. I still would love to go back to school, you know. So you talked about education and get my MBA, and a lot of people ask me why. I'm on a continuous journey to better myself. So I
And
think
maybe the question is why not?
That's right.
Yep, why not is a good one too. So no, I love look beyond your circumstance, and I would tell everybody it's never too late. So that's a great lead in for one of the next questions was, did you always know you wanted to be a CEO? Speaking of looking beyond your circumstance, and how did that come about?
No, I did not know that I wanted to be a CEO. I did not. Um, I guess I would just give a quick sequence here of those years. My junior, senior year of high school, very, very difficult for me. I was kicked out of school in my senior year of high school. We out there doing bad things and all that, and I guess the what I call the SEE, or um, the event that sort of turned me around, is I'm kicked out of school in October of my senior year. And I'll tell you, I mean, we were, shooting crap, smoking weed or whatever in the bathroom or whatever. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And the principal comes in. It's like 8 or 9 guys in the bathroom. We all, taking part in this. And he comes in and he just kicks 2 of us out. He said, "You two, Brown and Washington, you guys are out. The jig is up on you guys." I mean, we had a pretty lengthy record though, in high school of being doing bad stuff. Kicks me out, and I was expelled. He told me, you can't come back. And so for the next week or so, I don't know. It took a week for me to tell my mother. My mother worked for 12, 14 hours a day, a single mom, and I couldn't tell my mother. Finally, I had to tell her. And I thought she would just say, "Oh, okay, well, what you gonna do, and this is on you." Whatever. My mother said, "Oh, no, we're going up to the school." I was going up to the school, and we went up to that school, and I had never seen my mother get emotional. My mother was tough. I see my mother fight men, you know what I mean, to protect her kids. She was one of the toughest ladies that I've ever met. And she went up to that school, and when the assistant principal said that he's out, she broke down because she could not accept the fact that her only son would not get an education and would not graduate from high school. Her emotional outburst, if you will, shocked me. It shocked the vice principal, who knew our whole family. You know how these neighborhood schools go. All my sisters have been through, they're older than me and all that. That was my significant emotional event, or SEE. And then it dawned on me, I got to get my act together. And I went that day and joined the military. And we went on a buddy plan. This guy says, Brown, that was kicked out with me, he said, "Man, let's go down to 110th and Austin and join the freaking army and get out of here." I said, "Oh, okay." And we did. We went down, we signed up. But then the recruiter told me, he said, "Well, you got to be a high school graduate." And I was like, "What? I just got kicked out of school." But in that outburst, the vice principal was so taken with my mother that he said I could come back in January. So October, I missed October to January. And it became a serious thing for me. And I joined the military and spent 25 years on active duty and was fortunate enough to earn the highest rank possible in the United States Army for an enlisted person. And so I think all of that goes to our story. No, I was not thinking about being a CEO. You know, I mean, you know, even in the military, I was not thinking about earning Command Sergeant Major, the highest rank possible. I was not thinking about that. I was thinking about doing a good job and leading my people. And I think the story behind that is if we focus on that, of doing a good job, you know, in any position that we are assigned to, then the promotions will come. They will come if we take care of our people and if we lead with those core values that we talked about earlier.
That is awesome. I know you talked a little bit about your military. Was there anything else you wanted to share about how has, once you were in the military, how has that shaped you as a leader today? Well,
you know, I point to probably one big thing that happened. I mean, I had a lot of deployments. I'm a disabled veteran with a 100% disability rating. You know, I've had good assignments, bad assignments. I've had lots of scrapes and dangerous situations. But I point to one thing. When I was a young soldier, my first platoon sergeant, by the way, I came in right at the end of the Vietnam era. And I think I signed up in 1975. And I went to active duty in 1976. Or to basic training, I'm sorry. But my first unit, my first organization, I was in a air defense artillery unit. And my first platoon sergeant, and he was from Natchitoches, Louisiana. And he said to me, he said, Washington, I should be able to put you in any position, any specialty in this unit, even if you're not school trained for that particular job. I should be able to put you in any one of these positions and you should learn that job within 90 days. And that is what he told me. Because after any conflict, and the Vietnam conflict was ending, after any conflict, the military begins to draw down its forces. And, you know, we saw that in the first Iraq War. We saw that, you know, in other conflicts. And so we were drawing down the force around that time. And so he said that to me, and he proceeded to put me in like 10 different specialties, and I learned all those jobs. Now, you know, this was not, you know, open heart surgery or rocket science or anything like that. I mean, you wouldn't want to be operated on by a doctor that's been in the job for 90 days. So these jobs were not, you know, like open heart, like a doctor kind of stuff. I mean, they were sort of military jobs, but that stuck with me throughout my career, that I should be able to function and learn anything within 90 days. That stuck with me throughout my military career, where I was put in a lot of different assignments. That stuck with me in my transportation industry career. And that has paid off for me. So that is what I point to during my military career. And, you know, I could talk about a whole lot of other things. You know, obviously in 25 years, a lot of things happened, but I think about that right now as the turning point in my military career.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I know here at the airport, we may have individuals from the city as well that are connected to public safety, and many of them have military backgrounds. So first, thank you for your service. And, you know, the discipline and that you have when you talked about the learn things in 90 days, I think would be another valuable lesson for people today. But you started kind of talking about your transportation. So can you talk about how did you transition from military into transportation? And just asking, you said there wasn't a plan to become a CEO. So I'm just curious, was there a plan to make that jump or?
Every time I talk to transportation folks, most of them don't plan to be in the industry. Most of them, I'm just telling you. And I didn't plan. So
I don't think either of us, and I've been in this industry for 3 decades, and I don't think either of us plan to be where we're at right now. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Most of the folks I talked to didn't plan. I was stationed in Colorado. And I got orders to go to Korea. And at that time, Korea was a 1-year unaccompanied tour, which means that you can't take your family. And I was going to do that tour. I was going to accept those orders. I had reached the pinnacle of the enlisted force at that time. So I was an E9 Command Sergeant Major, and I was going to go for that 1 year. And then at the last minute, probably about, 4 or 5 months before I was supposed to leave, the United States Army, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make it a 2-year unaccompanied tour versus 1. And I said, this must be like a sign from God or something for me to retire from the Army. And so I decided I opened the newspaper like a couple days later, and I see this ad in the newspaper for the transit agency, one of sort of like a deputy role, handling the internal functions of the organization. And I went down and interviewed for the job. And you know what? The CEO at that time was a Vietnam veteran. And he understood what, my whole military career, he understood what it took to reach that level that I was at. And I think I answered maybe 2 questions from him. My name was one of them. And I can't even remember what the other question was. And I left, and by the time I got home, it was a voicemail offering me the job. My only problem is I had a year left in the military because I was so far, in the military, you have to apply for retirement. You know what I'm saying? And that's still the way it is now. And so I still had a year left. I called my personnel person at the Pentagon, who I knew very well over the 20-some years. And I said, hey, listen, man, I got a job. His name was Sergeant Major Larry Strickland. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. But he said, well, hey, Wash, you got a year, man. We can't take a year off. This is the United States Army, man. What do you think this is? We can't take a year off. He said, I'll do what I can. He took 6 months off my tour. And I went to the CEO of the agency, again, who was a Vietnam veteran, and I told him what the situation was, and he said, we'll wait for you. So now I tell that story because, one, you never know where and how people will find favor in you. And 2, and that was both ways. The guy at the Pentagon taking 6 months off, the guy who was the CEO of the agency saying he would wait for me. And that was in late 1999, early 2000. And of course, they waited for me at the agency. And the significance of that story is a year later, 9/11, the plane hit the Pentagon, killed my buddy who did that for me, that took off that 6 months, Sergeant Major Larry Strickland. And then the Vietnam veteran who was the CEO at the transportation agency, I ended up succeeding him as the CEO after working for him for 9 years. And he passed away. And so people will help you, right? People will, I think it's a true blessing when people find favor in you. And both those individuals were great people. They were individuals that did not come from my background, but saw the favor or were inclined to help. And so that is how I made my transition to the transportation industry. No plan, no, I mean, if I wouldn't have gotten the newspaper that day, I would not have been in transportation because there was an ad in the newspaper. Now, you know, how incidental is that?
Wow, thank you for sharing. And I've got
You may want to ask that question. You know, there's a question from Andrea Martin, which is one of our favorite people. Great discussion today, and I know you have a lot of thoughts when it comes to this. And she keeps writing, says, any closing thoughts on legislating or incentivizing transportation equity?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Mario, you know, we worked very, very diligently on equity. I am first of all, when we think about transportation, transportation has historically in this country, early in the last century, been used to divide communities. We know that, whether it's highways, whatever. I mean, and so this discussion of equity, oh man, it becomes so important. But we can't just talk about equity. I see a lot of statements now, since the social unrest last year, there's a lot of statements on, company and corporate websites and all of that. The key here is, how do we operationalize equity? How do we implement equity? How do we define sort of a common basis for talking and building an agenda around equity? And so what we have done, we have been very, very aggressive here in Los Angeles. We have stood up an Office of Equity and Inclusion. For every project, every program that we do, we look through the lens of equity. We developed an equity assessment of 6 simple questions that we asked around equity. Will it benefit? Will the decision impact historically marginalized communities? Could this present an equity opportunity? Who will benefit or be burdened by this decision that you're talking about in terms of a project or program? How will the decision prioritize the needs of the historically marginalized community? What's the strategies to mitigate any potential negative consequences? And then summarizing any adjustments or changes made to the decision due to this rapid equity assessment. So those 6 questions we asked on any project or program that we're thinking about doing. How will it impact? Now, the buzzword right now is equity, we know. The other buzzword out there right now is connecting communities. Ooh, in transit, we're connecting communities. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Connecting community. Now, that's a powerful thing when you say that. We're going to connect communities. Well, all of a sudden, that means, that we're going to establish maybe bus routes where they're not. That we are going to, tear down barriers that divide communities. I mentioned Chicago, the Dan Ryan Expressway, the 94 that goes through Chicago. My mother grew up in the city of Chicago, and when the Dan Ryan was built, that was initially thought to separate the communities, Black and white. That's what it was. And this now mobility was being thought of too, obviously, highway. But part of the reason to put that right down the middle was to separate the African American communities on the east side of the Dan Ryan and also the west side. And that's why you got areas like Bridgeport and, you know, those areas that are still white over there. And so, you know, infrastructure historically has been used to divide communities. And I think about infrastructure not just as highways, but I mean, you know, during the Jim Crow era, you know, swimming pools, folks couldn't, you know, swim in the same, that's infrastructure. Growing up where I grew up in Argyle Gardens, we had asbestos all through our apartments. I mean, you know, so when we talk about equity in this space, I'm very interested, and Mario and I talked about this during the Biden-Harris administration, you know, the Justice 40 initiative. What this administration is saying and what they have pledged is that 40% of infrastructure dollars will go to low-income communities. Now, that is a powerful statement. But before that can happen, the infrastructure has to change for grant programs. You have to change criteria for grant programs to include equity. And you have to figure out whether that's done administratively or legislatively. So there's a lot of work to be done.
And not to mention the native lands that do not have roadways,
Yeah.
running water, sewer. Some folks are in a very, very difficult situation, and we don't see it because we don't drive in there, or we don't drive in there.
That's right.
No, appreciate your perspective on equity and all that you're doing. A question kind of along those lines is, how diverse was the transportation industry once you started compared to where it is now, and any insight on what we need to do, you know, in the future?
Well, I mean, it wasn't that diverse when I started over 20 years ago. It's hard to believe, man. You know, I did 25 years in the Army. I've been in this business for over 20 years, the transportation industry. But I still feel fairly spry, you know. It was not very diverse. We've made a lot of strides, and that goes to people of color and women. Gender diversity it has improved a great deal. And I think it has to do with leaders, you know, like Mario, leaders, other leaders around the country. I mean, we've put together a transportation infrastructure career pathway, that shows people how to matriculate through the infrastructure space from cradle to grave, I call it. The cradle being, I mean, you know, one thing we were missing out here in Los Angeles was reaching young people, you know, better than what we were doing and orienting them to the infrastructure space. So we started a school. I mean, we're building a school out here, transportation infrastructure school, from the ground up, grades 9 to 12 in the heart of South Los Angeles, the heart of Black and brown communities. We're focusing on foster care kids, kids whose parents have been in the justice system. And so I think as we begin to focus on these populations, we will see more diversity. Diversity is key. I mean, you know, nature itself demands diversity, right? Nature itself. I mean, when was the last time we saw a rainbow with all the same colors? It's crazy. I mean, you know, flowers are different. Nature itself is sending a message to us that we must be diverse. And it's a beautiful thing. All we have to do is look at nature and it demands diversity. I don't want to be in a room with all men trying to make a decision. You know what I mean? Because listen, the decision is going to be probably bad. You know what I mean? It's not going to be well thought out. And the same thing goes for ethnic diversity, gender diversity, all of that. If we are all of the same mindset and we are all coming from the same perspective, the decision is, it may sound good when you're in the room with all the guys, right? And you're trying to make a decision that impacts everybody, including men, women, everybody, you know what I mean? And you don't have a woman in the room. Come on. This ain't cool.
Look, I really agree with that comment. Now, can we see, are there any other questions in the Q&A?
Well, we handled most of the questions. There's another question in the Q&A that we can't really answer. We can't really ask because it has a lot to do. It goes in depth into the Biden-Harris transition, which we kind of sort of can't talk about too much.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but you know, it is such an incredible honor to have you here, Phillip. And it was incredibly enlightening because, you know, it's very difficult for people to understand our life experiences. It's difficult to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but just these stories, and this is the first in a group of stories that we're going to tell that hopefully educate some people, but most of all, hopefully inspire some others to look at you, to look at me, to look at Holly, to look at everybody on here and say, you know what, we can do this. We don't have to look in the mirror and have this imposter syndrome.
Yep.
We could throw it away. And it's like regrets and imposter syndrome. You just put them down and walk away. It's difficult for us, and I'm saying that myself, being, you know, looking at myself in the mirror every morning going, God, I don't believe I live here. I don't believe I live in this neighborhood. I kind of don't believe I have the job that I've got, you know, and driving to work, I better, you know, like suck it up and get to work. And
Right. Well, I got to tell you, you know, as we wrap up that I think a couple of things that I would leave with you, and one is the leadership piece, right? I mean, you know, our friends at Harvard Kennedy School, and I know you've done that, Mario.
yeah, me too.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about leadership being dangerous because the idea has to be, can we do everything that we want to do and survive long enough to do it, right? Because there's so many tough decisions that we have to make, you know, as leaders. I mean, just in any industry, especially the government sector, right? Because guess what? They all know, you know, people on the street know better than us what's happening. You know what I mean? They always do. You know what I mean? So can we survive long enough to reach our goals? Can we, you know, as a CEO coming into an organization, especially a new CEO, we are like a foreign substance being injected into a living organism. And that living organism is going to either change us or we're going to change the organism being the organization. Many times leaders go into organizations and the organization changes them for the worst. And other times leaders change the organization. And so I think that as the really good leaders change the organization as it relates to equity, as it relates to diversity, as it relates to all of the things that we are talking about. And so I would leave that with you. I do believe leadership is a transferable skill. You know, when I was getting out of the military, I worried whether my skills in the military were transferable in this other sector, you know, in the other industry. I thought long and hard about that. You know, anybody that's in the military, they think about that. You know, are my skills transferable? I mean, early on, I was in air defense artillery. Now, I guess I could have went to a defense contractor or something. But it dawned on me that the transferable thing is leadership, because the common denominator are people in any industry. And so I think everyone should be encouraged that you can lead because that common denominator is people. And 80% of our issues in an organization as leaders have to do with people problems. So if we can handle that, then we're good to go. So it's great being with you all. Mario, it's great to see you again. And if there's anything that I can do, I know we just scratched the surface here with some of our conversation, but it's very enlightening, and I hope I was able to shed a little bit of my thinking around the topic.
Phil, it's hard to express how much gratitude we have for your time. Thank you very much. You're an amazing leader. I am sure everybody on this virtual meeting or virtual roundtable got, something that they needed and some inspiration they needed. So thank you very much, Phil. And Holli, do you have any last words?
Well, just in closing, I think we have exceeded our goal, in your story. And I think everybody has some key lessons they could take away. President Ousley opened with change the world. I think you've given folks a recipe on some things they can do to make that happen. We talked about equity, don't be about it, or don't talk about it, be about it. And you gave two great illustrations about doing a good job and leading your people, and the promotion will come. So we will advance equity if we do a good job and we lead our people. And your drop the mic comment that I think resonates with everybody is look beyond your current circumstance. So even though today we may not be where we want to be, we know we can get there working together. So I just want to thank you for making our first Equity Insights, in my opinion, a huge success. And we appreciate you, and we'll be following up because you also shared tidbits about your assessment and your 6 questions that I would love to send out to this group, because that's one thing we can do to be about it.
We'll send it to you.
Phil, thank you. And President Ousley, any last words if you're still there?
I will say this. This was enlightening for me, and just knowing the amount of passion that goes into all of this work, the very fact that we've got to be not just engaged, but intentional about it, and seeing, and hearing, the intentionality in the room today. I think I'm more fired up than I have been. And if I may just, one more time, I appreciate the leadership that you've shown, that our guest has shown, that Holli has shown, that your entire team has indicated. By not just doing the work, but now encouraging others, stepping out and talking about the work and normalizing the discussion. And we don't get there if we don't normalize it, and we don't address, and we don't make moves. And so thank you for that.
Awesome.
Sure.
Phil, thank you very much, Phil. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks to everybody who
Bye-bye, everybody.
participated, and have a great day.
Have a great day.
Bye. All right.